Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Working Class Hollywood, the podcast where I interview people that work in the entertainment industry. I hear their story, where they come from, talk about what they do for work, and we try to give you advice about how to navigate your career in the business. If you haven't already done so, I ask you guys every week, because it is really helpful, go on to iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you're listening to the show, and do me a favor, just give it a rating, drop a review, subscribe. It is really helpful to get the podcast into the ears of other people who may enjoy it. And I also like to hear from you. You are welcome to also shoot me an email at show@workingclasshollywood.com, or you can find me on Instagram. I'm at Producer Jerry. I kind of stopped managing the at Working Class Hollywood Instagram because I figured, you know what? I am the show and the show is I, so why do I need two separate accounts? Who cares? Anyway, let's get to the show. Welcome to Working Class Hollywood, conversations with people that make the movies, TV shows, and entertainment you love. If you're looking to break into or move up in the entertainment industry, or you're just a fan of content and want to hear about how it's made, this is the podcast for you. I'm your host, Jeremiah Smith. My guest today is Bill Fritz. Bill is an executive producer on The Real Housewives of Beverly Hills on Bravo. He's worked on a ton of other reality shows and a lot of Bravo shows. He specifically runs the post department on these shows, so the editors, story producers, everything that happens after filming. Bill is a great guy. He is a magician and a mentalist, and he's actually gotten me into magic, so we talk a little bit about that. He's also a very, very, very smart, intelligent, thoughtful person, and his approach to storytelling and the way that he looks at footage is just really, really interesting and fascinating. He actually equates working in post on reality TV to discovering the meaning of life, and it makes total sense when you hear him talk about it. I had a great time talking with Bill. I hope you guys will enjoy our conversation, so let's get to it. All right, I'm here with Bill Fritz, executive producer extraordinaire. He runs post currently on Real Housewives of Beverly Hills. And Bill, thank you for coming.
Thanks for asking me. It's real fun to be here.
We Bill and I just spent the last almost 2 hours drinking wine and talking about magic, because Bill is a big fan of magic. He's a magician, mentalist. He's been doing it forever, and he's now gotten me into it. The bug has bit me, and I'm spending all my free time and free money
and college education on your kids
on magic tricks and education and stuff. So we literally just did magic for each other for 2. He mostly did it for me for like 2 hours, and now we're pressing record. So.
I can always geek out on magic for hours.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. So Bill, we'll get to the work stuff and what you do, and I think you're the first person that I've had on that's specializes in post production and the editing side of things. So right. I'm excited to talk to you about that.
Yeah.
But I always start, where are you from, and how did you end up in LA?
That's a long story. I'll tell the short version. I'm from Detroit, Michigan, suburb of Detroit. Grew up in Detroit, and I'll tell you the shortest version I can of coming to LA, because growing up in Detroit, I never knew anybody in the entertainment business. The idea that you would be in the entertainment business was not even a possibility. So I went to college, and my dad worked for General Motors. Everybody I knew either worked for Chrysler or Ford or GM. I mean, it was just a real company town kind of thing. And I always knew I didn't want to do that. So when I got into college, went to Central Michigan and got involved in the radio station and started to have a real fun time, writing comedy. There was a comedy troupe we were part of, and got into writing commercials and things like that. So when I got out of college, got into radio stations and did some on-air work because these were super small stations in the middle of nowhere in Michigan. And so you did everything. You did on-air work. You sold. You did it all. You did promotions. And I wasn't great on air. You can tell from my voice. I'm not a
what are you talking about?
I'm not a radio guy. But I had fun, and I started writing commercials for local audio sales shop, audio stores and things like that. And I really started to enjoy the creative side of it, and hated. I mean, I worked in really small radio markets where there was just hardly anybody around. And so I made no money. I mean,
sure.
the pay was ridiculous. At the end of the year, I was just like, I would do my taxes and be so depressed. I was like, I could work at a gas station to make more money. I went to college and I'm making no money doing this. And I didn't have the bug to like go like, I want to get to Chicago or Los Angeles to be on the radio. It's like, that's not what I wanted to do. So I actually was working in Jackson, Michigan at this radio station, and I had no money for lunch. And so I would make peanut butter sandwiches and bring them with me. And I would have to go out and sell radio ads, and I couldn't sell anything because I'm not a good salesperson. And
is that like door knocking local businesses?
You call into local
you
businesses.
Want to advertise on the radio for
exactly. Like the one that was the most depressing was I went into this woman's house. She had opened in the front of her house a yarn shop to sell yarn. And for a week, I tried to get her to advertise on my radio station, and she went with the other station because I was asking for $5 an ad, and she got them for 25 cents.
Oh my gosh!
And I'm like, this is stupid. I went to college for this. And so the thing that's famous about Jackson, Michigan, is it's the home to the state penitentiary, and I would get so depressed that I would drive my car out to Jackson State Prison, the parking lot, and I would sit in the parking lot and eat my peanut butter sandwich and look through the fence at the prisoners playing basketball and just go, okay, you're not on the other side of the fence.
My life's not as bad as
exactly
that.
It's not as bad as that. It could be worse. And a guy came in at the radio station. He had graduated from the same college I did. This is turning into the longer story. I apologize.
It's okay.
But he was from the same college, but I didn't know him at the time. But he was like, "Oh, I went to Central," so we started to become friends. And he was into research. He's like, "I want to work for Arbitron or Nielsen, because Arbitron does radio ratings and Nielsen does TV ratings." And he got a job at Arbitron in Chicago, and I went to visit him. And he lived in downtown Chicago in this cool studio apartment. He had a briefcase and business cards and health insurance. And I was so broke. I was like, that was like the greatest job in the world. You're living in a city. You've got money to have a good time.
You have a briefcase.
I mean, I was like 2 years out of college. And I was like, how did you get this job? I want this job so bad. He goes, there's a job just like this one opened up in New York. And I was like, I really wanted, the one thing I knew is I wanted to get out of Michigan, not because I hated it, but as a kid, it just wasn't inspiring to me. I just didn't know what I was going to do there. So I borrowed money from my sister and flew out to New York for this job interview. And I had no experience in research, but I did have experience in radio sales. And I met this woman at Arbitron who was going to be my boss. And she was like, "You're so not qualified for this job." And I said, "You know what though?" And then I went to the greatest sales pitch of my life to pitch how hard I was going to work for her.
Yeah.
And so finally she was like, "You know what? Come back in a half hour and meet my boss." And I said, "All right." So across the street was on 55th and 6th, and across the street was where they shot it's the front of the Seinfeld diner.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And I'm like, oh, this is the Seinfeld diner. I go, and of course, it's like nothing like it because I don't know anything about TV yet. And I had lunch there and then walked across the street and met this guy. And he said, "Maddie tells me you're a real ball buster." And I said, "Okay." And he goes, "But you live in Michigan. This is New York City." And he completely, tried to intimidate me. And I had nothing to lose. I had nothing to go back for. And so I'm still to this day shocked at how ballsy I was. And I was like, you are going to make the biggest mistake in the world if you don't hire me.
Wow.
And what I didn't know at the time was Arbitron was like Nielsen. Nielsen's the only company that does TV ratings. Arbitron was the only one that did radio ratings, but there was a new company called Birch Radio out of Boston that had the crappiest research. If you were to look at the statistical reliability of it, it was done so cheaply that there was, you might as well just reach into a hat and pull a number out. That's how accurate it was. But the ad agencies and the radio stations were so sick of the monopoly that Arbitron had that they were buying it and canceling Arbitron. So for the first time in the history of the company, they had this whole structure of employees who were just lazy and had it easy and made a ton of money and never had to work for it. And now they're getting their asses kicked. And so I happened to walk in at the right time, not knowing that they were looking for guys and women who, were aggressive and wanted to, and hungry. And so I happened to come in at the right time. So he said, well, I'll think about it and I'll give you a call. And when I flew back to Michigan, my phone rang and they said, come out to New York.
Wow.
So sorry about the long story.
That's
worked at Arbitron for 5 years.
Oh, wow.
Moved up and got promoted and got transferred to San Francisco and then got transferred to Los Angeles to run the Los Angeles office.
And what were you doing? I was tracking ratings for radio?
I was actually on the sales side where I would go to ad agencies and basically teach them how to use the numbers. How do you use the ratings to determine how much to spend on advertising? There was a side that taught radio stations how to use the numbers to pitch to agencies. Mm-hmm. And I was the other side that helped the agencies kind of figure out the best ways to use the numbers against the radio stations to try to get the lowest rates.
Working both sides.
Yeah. And you start to realize like numbers are very empirical. They always say like the number's the number. But whenever, you hear like, oh, this is the number, there's so many factors to it. There's the reliability of it. There's the sample size. There's all this kind of stuff that I didn't know nothing about at the time, but had to learn. And you realize just like anything else, you can use numbers to tell a story. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the common thread of what I enjoyed was telling stories. And so I learned how to use research and numbers to tell stories of whatever I wanted to do. So I would teach agencies to do that. So I was calling at McCann Erickson and BBD&O and all these different ad agencies. I don't even know if they exist anymore. But so I was doing that and really successful, making good money as a young kid, living in New York and San Francisco and Los Angeles. But when I was in San Francisco, I had this moment where, I was walking down the street and I looked into the glass of a skyscraper building and I saw a reflection of, this sounds like I'm making this up, but this is exactly what was going on in my mind. I saw someone who I thought was next to me and I looked at them and went like, what a monkey. Got the suit with the briefcase, it's just like a business monkey kind of guy. And then I went, oh shit, that's me. I literally did not realize that was me.
Wow.
And I kind of went home and
didn't recognize yourself.
I didn't. And I thought, what the hell am I doing with my life? I wanted to get out of Michigan and I wanted to live in a big city and have a lot of fun, but this is not the career I want to do. And so I decided in my mind, I've always wanted to, because I was on the the West Coast, I started to meet people who were, involved in the entertainment business, which never seemed like an option for me before. Mm-hmm. And I was like, you know what? I would love to get into that. I've always liked to write. I wrote commercials back in Jackson, Michigan, and I've always liked that. And maybe there's something to do in that. And so I decided I'm going to save as much money as I can for 1 year. And then I'm going to quit and I'm going to go to film school. So it's exactly what I saved all my money. I stopped everything. I stopped spending. I stopped going out, saved as much as I could.
Stop buying magic tricks?
Stop buying magic tricks. I did. I did that. I was a member of the Magic Castle when I moved to LA and I canceled my membership.
Oh man, painful.
I know. And then I got into, unfortunately, but I applied to a lot of different film schools, and I got into the most expensive one, which was USC. And no one else accepted me. So I blew through that money very quickly.
And was this their undergraduate or their
graduate program?
And what was the degree that you were going for?
Bachelor of Fine Arts, or Bachelor of, a B, what is it? No, not a bachelor, an MFA. Master of Fine Arts.
In TV and film?
In TV and film production.
Do you, at USC, do you do like an emphasis or like a track that's like writing or directing?
They have a writing program, and they have a producer's program, this Peter Stark program, and then they had the production program. I was just like, I knew nothing. Like, look, I was the guy who went to the movies and was like, wow, what are all those titles? What does a grip do?
Yeah.
What's Foley? I have no clue. So I just wanted to generalize and get into film and figure it out. So I spent my time there as a grad student, working on people's films, doing every single kind of job possible. Fortunately,
how old were you when you did that, if you don't mind saying?
How old was I? 24.
Oh, okay. So you were still like fairly young. You weren't like,
I wasn't like,
you weren't 40. The old guy in the back of the in the room.
I was older than most people. Like, there was a group of us. There was probably like 10 or 12 of us that were older, and there were some that I had been out of undergrad 3 years, I think. 3 or 4 years before I went to film school, and there was a group of us that had all kind of got out of, and I think that's why I got into USC, because at the time, at least, USC valued people who had life experience.
Yeah.
They didn't want you coming out of undergrad right into grad.
Sure.
And so there was a group of us that had some kind of life. There was a guy who lived in a commune, and he was the truck driver to bring supplies to an ashram kind of commune up in Portland, where the Maharishi got arrested for having sex with everybody. I mean, it was just like all these wild stories. But so I tried everything, and still enjoyed writing. And what I found is I was bored to death on the set. I did sound, because that was the good thing I did in terms of my experience, was because I was in radio, I was able to get a full scholarship as a sound TA in the sound department, which was a great department.
Full scholarship?
Well, a full ride. Yeah. So it paid for, there's a half and a full TA ship. So it didn't pay for everything, but it was a full TA ship, whatever that was. I paid for like 70% of my costs.
That's good.
Yeah. And at the time, USC isn't, I think it's the most expensive school in the world to go to right now. It wasn't quite that, but that was that allowed me to live off my money for a while. And not have to get a job, and I could just focus on going to film school. So, worked in the sound department, which was, that was the sound department that was created with George Lucas and Steven Spielberg. And Steven Spielberg didn't go there, but donated money for the sound stage, learned how to use mixers and do Foley and ADR, and had the keys to the sound department, which made me the most popular guy in the world, because I would have, like, on weekends, friends that had bands would come in, and I would use the Spielberg soundstage to record their bands and learn how to use the equipment. So it was great. It was a really, really fun time. But found out that I hated doing production. I found it, especially for movies, versus reality TV is completely different.
Yeah.
But for movies where everything is scripted and planned out, unless you were the director, you sat around and waited until they said, okay, get ready. Then I'd hold out my boom and do the dialogue, and then sit down and wait for an hour.
Right.
And so I didn't have the temperament for that. Loved sound editing, loved picture editing, loved writing, anything that involved me by myself in a room. I just, I always told people, they were, curious about what to do. I said, here's the thing about writing. You can get great at it you keep doing it. When you want to be a director, it's really expensive to get good at it, because people have to hire you to do it. And it's different now because you have iPhones and you have your own editing software, but it still is, to get a real job, it's really hard to have someone say yes to you as a director because there's just so few jobs and you don't get a lot of experience. But if I want to learn how to write, it's just my ass on a chair and I just write.
Yeah.
And I give pages to people and see if they find them entertaining. So I just felt I could get better at this at no cost.
Yeah.
Other than time. And so that kind of that's my personality. I do think, I don't know how, I mean, you've done both, right? You've done post and production.
I do post and field, and I can go back and forth between the two. I've kind of become, in the last few years, it's been more field stuff with all these Bravo shows. But I also edit for myself. I'm kind of an avid geek.
Right.
I have it at home. I work on stuff if I've done stuff for myself.
Do you enjoy them equally? Because they definitely give you different things.
Yeah, they both appeal to different parts of my brain. And, so I'm a very sociable guy, and I can hustle and do that. So that kind of appeals to the field side of me.
Right.
But I think I'm also, I can be very meticulous and patient, and I'm happy to sit in my room and work alone, and do that by myself. So I kind of have both sides to it.
Yeah,
so
that's perfect, because I do think it's like what energizes you. People think like, how can you sit in a dark room and just work by yourself? Well, if that's what energizes you, that's great.
Yeah.
Some people need the outward output of energy from people on a set. I mean. And I do, I did post for the longest time. And then a couple of years ago, I left Evolution, where we both work. And in a more oversight capacity, oversaw shows for the BBC for a couple of Bravo shows.
Yeah.
So I was more involved in post. Like I was on set. One of them was in London. I did Ladies of London season 3. And then I did Texacanas in San Antonio recently. So I lived in London for a while, and I lived in San Antonio for a while from a production standpoint. And the camaraderie that's developed.
Yeah.
I mean, you understand why people have affairs and relationships, because it is a small communal thing, and you're going through an incredibly intense schedule day to day to day, and it bonds everybody.
Yeah.
I can see what the appeal of it is. I didn't see that when I was at film school holding my, boom mic and bored out of my skull. But I see the reality. Like I said, that's why I think reality TV is much different.
I always say it's
everybody's
like
more
summer
involved.
Camp.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like a very intense, fun experience that's like high emotion, high stakes, high drama, and then it's like, and then it's over.
It's it's a very specific kind of energy, and then there's post, and but just naturally I gravitate toward that solitude. Although reality TV in post isn't solitude. It's not like, right, because I had a whole scripting career, that I balanced with reality TV. I wrote a feature that I sold to Paramount. I wrote a sitcom. I wrote a Disney Channel movie on magic called Now You See It.
That's right. There's a huge poster for it on the Evolution office.
Yeah. So I had a scripted life that I was balancing when I wasn't either working or getting paid to write, and I needed to pay the bills. I would go into reality TV.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of people that are doing that. I think that are working in reality TV, producing, that are also pursuing the writing or the
or
scripted
directing
project,
or
directing
anything.
Exactly, because it is, it's not to say it's easy to get a job in reality, but I would say it's probably easier to get a job in reality than on a studio feature.
Completely. Yeah. I tell, I speak at colleges at times. I like to do that. And I tell, I was that guy in college. I was sitting there going, I'm going to be the next big, I'm going to be David Mamet. I'm going to be, Aaron Sorkin kind of things. And you realize that it's just such a rare, so many lightning strikes have to take place for that to happen. But reality TV is much easier. So I go to these schools and I speak, and I'm like, don't poo-poo. And it's changed. 10 years ago, people might have had an attitude about reality TV, but now it is so popular and so ubiquitous everywhere and so successful. And the money is so much better. You can actually have a good living making this stuff versus maybe 15 years ago.
Sure.
That it's much easier to get in this business. It's not, there's a big push to try to get everything unionized. And I'm like, I understand it. I would like to have health insurance,
Right.
but I also go, be careful what you wish for, because the second it's unionized, the second it becomes really hard to get a job because everyone's going to go after it.
Yeah.
That's why it's so hard. When we had a partner, we wrote a sitcom for Fox. I had been trying to break into scripted writing for years. I wrote, a West Wing episode and a Law and Order episode, and I had meetings at these companies, and I almost got on staff kind of stuff. It was just like, it was so hard to do it. And then when we sold this sitcom and it actually got made, and it looked like it was going to go and get selected for Fox for the season, we started interviewing writers, and I got to sit with all the Fox executives and hear them talk about how to build the staff. And I realized how hard it was. I mean, they had all the reasons for they already had the staff figured out,
Right.
and there were all these reasons behind it. And I was sitting there going, no wonder I couldn't get on Law and Order. Like, it's all
Like this
very
many women,
close
this many
community.
women, this. We need this many positions from our diversity initiative. We want
Yep.
someone with experience in XYZ that bring that and da da da. So it's like they build the template of the staff and then just find the people to fit in, kind of thing.
Exactly. And they definitely go off of, well, we've worked with these. There's so much money involved that they only want, it makes complete sense. They only want to work with the people that they know that can deliver.
Yeah.
So they rarely take chances on newbies, kind of thing. And you got to have a friend who gets a show sold, who brings you in because they trust you, kind of thing. It's a tough. At least it was when I tried it, and but it was when you're on the other side and you don't see how staffs are picked, you don't see how features are sold. You sit there and you think, my stuff's just not good enough. Mm-hmm. It's like, why isn't my stuff good enough? Why am I not getting a job opportunity? I must not be that good. It's really hard on you. Then when you get to the other side and you see how you're like, oh, it does have to be about talent. I mean, you have to have talent to get into the conversation. But after that, there's 9 other things that have to fall perfectly in place for you to land this thing.
Yeah.
We had, I have on my feature stuff, I had not for the magic movie, but for the comedy stuff that I wrote, I had a good friend from film school. We were partners, and I'd been trying to, I was represented by William Morrison. I was trying to do like series dramas, like West Wing and things like that. I like, ensemble dramas.
Yeah.
He had sold a screenplay, or he wrote a screenplay called Sweet November with Keanu Reeves and Charlize Theron. And the movie was about Charlize Theron has cancer and picks out one guy to kind of change his life before she dies. And that got made. And so it ends up, he would go to his agent and he would be like, what other jobs can I get? And they were like, basically, we have 5 different scripts that people want you to write. They're all chicks with cancer. That's what they called them. He was like, I got the chicks with cancer films.
Oh, he got pigeonholed.
Yeah. And I was doing crime dramas, like, 1 hour crime dramas. And I was the 1 hour crime drama guy, because that's how you were, you are what you write, and that's what you're trying to get. And we would get together and have a couple beers and go, we're already being pigeonholed when we haven't even been, successful yet.
Right.
And we would go, we should just write a stupid comedy, like just a stupid ass comedy, like the dumbest thing we could think of. So we came up with this idea that was about 2 loser kids in high school who try to hit on the hot Swedish foreign exchange student, thinking it's going to change their value in school. And they make asses of themselves, but they get the great idea of like, we should just go to Sweden because all the girls are hot in Sweden and we'll be like the Americans in Sweden. So we wrote this thing called Sweden, Ohio that sold to Paramount. And the reason it sold, and this was the thing, is we had tried to pitch things before and could never sell anything. We could never figure out why. And we had a friend of ours, the guy could take a dump and he could sell it. And he was in such a wheelhouse of success. He had sold 5 things in 2 years.
Wow.
And he would pitch us his ideas, and we would listen to him and go, oh yeah, that's great. And then he would leave and we'd go, that's the stupidest idea we've ever heard. And then we'd read in Variety, 3 months later, he sold it. sold it for $1 million. And we're like, man, unbelievable. So we put this pitch together for this idea, pitched it to our agents, and then went around town. And the first 4 or 5 pitches, they were like, oh, really funny. And then didn't sell. Went into Paramount, pitched it again. Just a normal pitch. It ended just like every single other pitch. Got home, sold. It was like, wow. And having that happen made me realize, like when we talked to them, like, why did you pick this film? We're just curious. They were like, well, they had just the like 3 days before we walked into our pitch, they had a development meeting at Paramount Studios, and they said we had already spent all our money for development for the year on crime, on action, on different things. We're missing one thing. We're missing teen comedy.
Yeah.
Does anybody have a teen comedy idea? We happened to walk in 3 days later and pitch a teen comedy.
The right moment for what the studio needed.
Exactly. Yeah. And it made me realize, like, don't judge your talent or don't criticize yourself of how talented or not talented you are based on all these different factors, because it's not just about talent. There's 5,000 other things.
Yeah. That's it. I want to back up real quick.
Yeah, I'm jumping all over the place.
That's
Sorry.
okay. Hey, this is your interview, Bill. So what did you do leaving film school? So you graduated from USC, decided you hated production. Is that when you poured yourself into the writing, or what were you doing? Were you doing something else to make money at the same time?
Well, I was writing. I wrote a spec script out of school, and I made a film. I directed a film on magic.
Oh,
it was it was called The Catch, and it was about a guy, a magic duo that did the bullet catch on stage. And it was basically a 10-minute film about how the animosity that these two had over a girl, and they performed the bullet catch every single night on stage. And it gets to the point where you think, like, he's so jealous, he's just going to screw the trick up and purposely put the bullet through his friend's head. Mm-hmm. And so, it was a way for me to mix a little drama with my magic, my love of magic. So I made that film, and it got me a lot of meetings, and I had written a screenplay, just a basics, a thriller screenplay to kind of my calling card, and that got me my agent. And so right out of film school, I was going on all different kinds of meetings, hoping that I was going to sell something, and eventually did sell a couple things, but they weren't for the massive amounts of money. I thought you start to realize how there's the dream, the myth of what the business is like, and then what you really do.
Yeah.
And in all that, I had been, my wife, Kathleen.
Yeah.
We had been dating, and we got married.
Where'd you meet her?
On a blind date.
When you were in school or afterwards?
Yeah, in school. I was going to film school. A friend of mine's wife set us up.
Nice.
And and Kathleen goes, so who is this guy? She goes, he goes to film school. And she's like, okay, that means he doesn't have a job. And then he goes, but he likes magic, and he's a member of the Magic Castle. And Kathleen knew a bunch of magicians. Like, she knew Penn and Teller. And she was like, okay, magicians are assholes. It was like, it's a miracle we actually ever hit it off. But we did. And we got married when I got out of film school. And she was a producer in reality TV. And she had not started at Evolution yet.
Okay.
And hadn't met Doug Ross, who you've interviewed.
Yeah. And
you've talked about Evolution. But she was working for Fox and for a few other places doing reality TV. So when I came out and I was around pitching this script idea and, waiting for it to sell kind of things, she would be like, you should make some money. And so the very first reality TV job I got was doing as a story producer for Pie Town, the company Pie Town. They had done this show called Intimate Escapes. Mm. And it was a woman who would travel around the world to different great hotels, like in Positano, Italy. And The show was a combination travel show, like they would tour through some of the features of Positano, but they would also, it was an architecture show in the sense of they would talk about the design of the hotel. And then it was also a food segment. So here I am, like, I don't know, 27, 8 or whatever. I know nothing about any of this.
How'd you get the job?
Kathleen.
Oh, she helped you
She
get
was
it.
like, she was friends with the owners of Pie Town, and she said, my husband's looking for work. He's a really good writer, and they're like, hey, we could use him. So I went over there. They were super nice. They were like, hey, we'll give you one show. Just write. This was when you wrote this script.
Right.
You had
This was not doing string outs in Avid.
Exactly. This was before Avid.
Yeah.
And so they would give you the tapes, and you'd go home with your tapes and watch them at home, and you would write the script. So they gave me one episode to watch, and I'm sitting at home, and I'm like, okay, I know nothing about architecture whatsoever. I know nothing about cooking. I know nothing about, the only thing I really knew or was interested in was the travel segment, because at least I could relate to that on some level. So I would sit at home and go, I am such a loser. I don't know what I am doing. I can't do this job. I so want to get fired off my first job because I cannot write this. I don't know what to do. And so finally I just like, screw it, just do it. And so I honestly, I made stuff up. I looked on the internet. I made stuff up. I made phrases up. I made features up of architecture that didn't make any sense. I just made it up. And I put it all together, and I thought for sure I'm going to turn the script in and they're going to go, what the hell did you just give us? I turned it in and I got a phone call. They said, could you come in and meet with us about the script? I'm like, yeah, absolutely. And I'm thinking, this is when I get fired, and how embarrassing for my wife.
Yeah.
And they said, we read your script. We love it. We want to make it a template for all the shows. And I was like, oh my God. And they were great. And I ended up, for the next 6 or 7 months, I did like 15 or 20 episodes, and it was great because you could call up and go, I need an episode. And they would go, well, here you go. And when you got done, you turned it in and they gave you a check.
Wow. And you would be you're working from home?
Yeah. Working from home, watching the tapes, writing the script, turning it in, getting a check. So it was really like restaurant work in the sense of you can go in and do your shift and walk out with cash.
Yeah.
And so it was the perfect job for me to do while I was trying to continue to write screenplays and sell spec scripts and things like that. But it started to get my toe into reality TV. And I think that what they responded to, I mean, I exaggerate a little bit in terms of I made everything up. It's not like it was completely fictitious, but there were elements I had no clue on. I just wrote stuff. But I think it was the writing, my love for writing and my ability to write that they responded to. And I started to get really positive feedback just in general from reality TV work, because it was still pretty early in the world of reality TV. And so someone who knew structure and storytelling and could tell an entertaining story, I think they valued. And so I came again, kind of like Arbitron walking in at the right moment. I walked in at the right moment where reality TV needed strong storytelling. And so I continued to do that. And I, for several years, balanced both jobs and would work on shows at Evolution, like a show for TBS called Home Rules, a competition home show. Would work on that. And then all of a sudden I get a phone call from Disney and go, we bought your script for, the Disney Channel. So I'd leave the show, and Doug was really cool and go, hey, congratulations. And they filled me in with somebody else. And I went off and wrote the script. And then that's the thing about feature films and stuff like that. It's like you wait forever. It takes forever for things to get made. And so then I was like, okay, that was a decent paycheck, but I still need money. So I'd go back to reality TV. And then we sold our sitcom to Fox, and then we went off and did that, but it didn't get selected. It got made as a pilot, but it wasn't selected that year. Back to looking for making money. So I had both feet in both worlds.
Yeah.
For probably 4 or 5 years. And then Housewives came along.
Which Housewives? Orange County?
Orange County was the first one. It was season 5. And my wife, Kathleen, was one of the producers on the show. And they had a tough season, and they had to let some people go. And she was like, I need some people I can rely on. And she knew me and Tony Gallagher, you know Tony?
Yeah.
She brought in Tony and myself and people she had just worked with who were reliable. And I had worked on a couple different reality shows. I did a show called Beach Patrol.
Yeah.
A few other shows where, you really had to manufacture drama to make things work, especially for like true TV kind of, those high energy shows. And I hated doing that stuff. And my first season, my first show on Housewives was season 5. Lynn Curtin was throwing a housewarming party for a brand new house she had just bought with her husband. They had just moved in. And then the very next day, guys from the bank show up and knock on the door and evict them.
Oh God, yeah.
and I was just so blown away watching the material. I'm like, this is incredible. I mean, this is real. This happened. I don't have to pretend like a sprained ankle on the beach is going to kill somebody and make a big deal about it for true TV. This woman just got kicked out of her house. I mean, it was wild. And so that was my introduction to Housewives, and just fell in love with it. And I know we're jumping all over. I'm not even sure if I've gotten to LA yet in your story.
No. This is film school.
Yeah.
Writing, reality TV. Now we're into Housewives. I think we're on a good track.
Good. But I really started to fall in love with the format of telling. The thing I loved about like West Wing was my ideal show. I'd written my spec script and I got my agent off of that, and I got a lot of attention off my script, but realize you never get hired for the sample script you write. But what I loved about that stuff was I loved telling multiple stories, throughout an episode. 5, 6 characters all have different stories interwoven together.
Yeah.
And if you're telling the story well, each of those stories, although they're separate individual stories, somehow echo off each other and strengthen the overall storytelling. I mean, that's the perfect, and Sorkin does that better than anybody in the world. And I got into Housewives and had, Vicky and Tamra and Gretchen and Heather and they all had to have stories, and and you had 22, 23 episodes, these long seasons. And it really became this huge writer's challenge of how do I tell all of these stories and interweave them in the perfect way to strengthen each story without having the ability to make it up.
Right. Well, I was gonna interject a little bit, and you say, writing a writer's challenge. You're not writing the words that they say.
No.
You're not creating the storylines. In reality, it's like you have the footage,
right, and
you make the story from the footage you have, and you have a little bit of play with like the interviews and stuff that you can get.
Exactly.
When you started on Housewives, were you story producing then, or were you already in the like supervising or supervisorial role?
I had done all kind of reality shows, a lot through Evolution. I had done Fear Factor. I heard you talk about Doug about I did the very first season of Fear Factor.
Yeah, such a good story.
I ran the story department for that. For Beach Patrol, I ran the story department. I'd worked my way up to run story, but Bravo, as you know, is a different beast, and they don't trust a lot of people, and you have to have a track record with them. So when my wife said, "Could you just come in?" It's a story producer position, but I really need you. I was like, absolutely. And it was the best thing I did. I mean, I deal now with people who want to move up and people who want to, they have high positions, but they don't want to take the lower job. And it benefited my career so much, not having the ego of what your title is, but what you need at that moment. And I had no problem going down to a story producer and because I learned what the show, I had fun making each individual episode. I wasn't responsible for the big picture.
Right.
And
you live with the footage and like
exactly
pull the moments and everything. Will you actually just, because I haven't had anyone that really focuses on post in reality. what is a story producer? So if someone's listening to this and they don't know
Yep.
how, the shows we make are made, what are the story producers doing?
Yeah, the way it's structured is, excuse me, is the story producer is responsible for an individual episode, and they have a story editor as a second person with them. So it's a team of a story producer and the story editor, and so they'll be in charge of one particular episode. So if I'll determine, like, we'll all get together and determine, like, what's in this episode. It's this scene and this scene and this scene and this tentpole event.
Of stuff that's already been shot.
Yeah, it's all been shot.
Looking at the logs and the
Yep.
calendar and, the scene list and being like, okay,
Yep.
this is what's
and it's
going
all
in that
very
episode.
linear in the sense that, a big tentpole event, I call them tentpole events because they're the big party or
Yeah.
the big event that you focus the show on. But you also have to have individual stories as well. It's not just big event after big event. Some of those stories relate to and are in the right timeline of that event. So if the event was a Thanksgiving party, these are scenes that were shot the week leading up to Thanksgiving. But also where you do have some freedom is like, I do need a personal story from a certain cast member, and they weren't really that active that week. We didn't shoot a lot with them, but so what's going on in their life in the timeline of this series? Oh, there's, their kids went off to college. Well, we do have that scene. It was shot in December when they checked in with their kid at college, but I need it to play now.
Right.
And it's what we call evergreen. There's no timeline, attached to it.
Right.
And so I can move it. So there is some freedom of where you decide to move scenes, but in general, as you know, you kind of follow the linear shooting of the season.
What I find happens a lot is that, you want to get clever and creative and, move scenes around in the timeline.
Right,
And then
right.
it's like, it just doesn't quite work. And like 9 times out of 10, the solution is just like, put it back in order. And it's just like, that's what makes it make sense.
That's exactly. And a lot of times we'll be struggling with a scene and we'll just go, wait a second, what was really the timeline? Let's stop this. You're right. And then it's like, oh, that makes sense.
Yeah.
You try to get too cute and too clever.
Yeah.
But so a story producer, you'll say like, okay, so these are the beats and the scenes and the events in your episode. And that team of story producer and story editor go off and they're responsible for putting that show together. So they'll watch all the footage. So that party, as you know, you shoot a party for 4.5 hours. It ends up being 7.5 minutes of television. They have to watch all the 4.5 hours. They have to listen to, if you have, Vanderpump's got how many cast members?
At
It's
this
just
point, 20.
Yeah,
We're at 20.
I can't imagine how long it takes you guys to go through those parties, because at Housewives we have 6 or 7 or 10 people mic'd. Main people, the main cast members in the house and the husbands or the friends, and you listen to every single one of those mics and you figure out what everybody's doing. You hear all the conversations and you start to figure out. Now that my job is to meet with that team and say, here are the story beats leading into this episode. This conflict's taking place. That conflict's taking place. This thing is happening. That thing's happening. We need to continue that or end it, or there's something new that takes place that starts a new conflict, and we need to start it in this episode because that's when it happened, the fight that's going to carry on for 5 episodes. So that's going to become, so we'll talk about what's important. So as they watch all of this footage, they'll be sensitive to what's most important.
Yeah.
And then they'll come back and say, this is how we want to put this show together. And it'll be like, okay, that's good. Or what about this? And we'll talk about it. And then they'll put together, as you said, string outs of the footage and they'll give it to an editor. But so this, and the story producer, that individual person is responsible for the storytelling for that episode. And my job is the big picture, to put it all together, to have it make sense. But I need each of my story producers to be strong storytellers so that each episode is entertaining and maximizes the drama and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I always say that, like, if the episode is like a raw block of marble,
Yeah.
right? And that's all the footage that you have. the story producer is the one that goes in and like chisels away into like the rough form, and maybe the executive producer, someone like yourself, is sort of like shown them a sketch of what it should look like, but then they go in and they actually chisel it out, give it its like basic form so you can like see what it's supposed to look like. And then the editor is the one that goes in and does the fine tune honing and polishing and you know, gives it all the detail and everything like that. That's my analogy that I like to use.
It's true. And it's and you realize it's a whole team of people who put this together, because the challenge, again, when I got involved in Housewives, that's the fire that was, you know, lit in me of, you like to tell complicated, interwoven storytelling. This is what this format is. And it's even more challenging than writing fiction, because you can make it up, you know, right on the spot and make everything make sense. In reality TV now, we are given, you know, 100,000 puzzle pieces, and all you're told is the puzzle has to be made up of 1,000 pieces. And we're not even telling you what the picture looks like. You just got to figure out the best 1,000 pieces. And so there's a lot of creativity on everybody's part, from the editors and the story producers and the story editors, everybody, of going, okay, how do we cut away most of this stuff that you shoot to tell the most entertaining but true stories? Because that's the other thing is, the question I get asked a billion times is, you make this stuff up, right? I mean, you script it. You have to script this stuff. And it's like, you know, I know there are reality TV shows that are soft scripted, and there's all different variations of reality TV shows. And I even know some housewife shows are a little bit more than others. We're not at all. I mean, an Evolution with Orange County, with Beverly Hills, man, those are as natural as they come.
Yeah.
I mean, we put them in situations, you know, otherwise you don't have a show.
Yeah.
You're upset with that person. I'm going to get the two of you together and you have to have lunch.
Right.
In real life, you probably wouldn't have lunch together. For the show, you got to have lunch. But I'm not going to tell you what to say, and I'm not going to tell you how to resolve your issue. You want to throw a glass of wine at her? Be my guest. You want to hug and make up? Be my guest. Don't care. Networks don't like those kinds of shows because they're expensive, because you don't know what you're going to get.
Right.
You have to roll camera and tape or digital bits, but you gotta spend the time to shoot the 2.5 hour lunch, where if it was scripted and you said, okay, you're going to say that you're pissed off because you called her boyfriend and you didn't, you know, and then you're going to get upset and walk off. You can shoot that scene in 25 minutes.
Right.
The story team can put that together in a couple hours, and the editor can have that ready to watch. When you shoot a 4-hour lunch and you're not sure what you're getting, you got to watch that material. You got to, you know, I think it's much more creative and it's much more, you know, challenging than just being able to make it up on your own.
Yeah. And the time that you have to shoot, not just hours in the day, but just like weeks or months to get those stories. Because if you were just like, oh, we're going to make this show, we're going to shoot for 6 days and da-da-da. It's like, well, maybe nothing happens in those 6 days.
Yep.
I mean, the seasons of Housewives that I've worked on, and this is where I feel like Housewives is a bit different than Vanderpump Rules, a lot of the stories are they're more slow burning.
Yeah.
So something will happen, a small thing that you feel like maybe was not that significant, and then like 6 weeks later, you're like, oh, it's like still in their minds because of this, or they're, you know, and then it comes full circle and you're talking about it. So you have the pieces because you were shooting for 12 weeks, 5 days a week.
Right.
Had you just tried to like step in and just like shoot a quick thing, wouldn't have, you know, you never would have had it.
Yep. There is, you know, we're doing season 10 of Beverly Hills right now. I cannot say too much about what's going on.
Sure, yeah.
But so Kyle comes home after she's shooting Halloween 2 or whatever it's called. There's the title for it, with the second Halloween in this new series. Mm-hmm. And so she was gone for a lot of the first month of production that we were shooting. She was in North Carolina shooting. She comes back and she throws a party. And so this is really the first time that all the cast members are together in Beverly Hills. And so we play this game. We were like, hey, because there's a couple new cast members. And so they came up with the idea. We had an idea of like maybe a couple games they could play, but they came up with their own idea. Again, this is the realness of it. And the idea was, let's go around the table and we'll tell each person what we thought of them, what our first impression of them was.
Oh, that sounds dangerous.
And then what we think of them now. And I'm thinking, okay, this will be fun.
Yeah.
Well, it starts around the table, and I can't again tell too much. I don't want to ruin it, but you'll see it in the Super Teas, for example. But they were blowing so much smoke up their asses of just everybody was saying the most positive, nice things about each other. And it was just, you're so pretty, you're so special. And it's going from person to person, and they're going on and on. And Chris Cullen is, I don't know if you've interviewed Chris or not.
I haven't. I should, yeah.
He would be another great guy to interview.
He runs the field and sort of production talent side of
Beverly Hills.
Beverly Hills.
Yeah. We're sitting there watching this on the monitor, and I'm cringing. I'm just going, Chris, stop this. This is horrible. They are just kissing each other's asses. And his philosophy, everybody, it's really interesting. I don't know what because you're in the field all the time.
Yeah.
His philosophy is once it gets going, I'm not going to stop it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to let it play itself out because you just don't know what you're going to get. My tendency would be to walk in and go, okay, ladies, stop with all the schmooching and kissing.
Yeah.
Let's, be honest.
Be honest.
Be honest.
Right.
It's not, don't make stuff up, but be honest because they're not being honest. But that's not always the best thing. And he didn't stop it. And it went, and finally one person went, well, we're supposed to tell the truth, right? And then they do. And I don't want to give anything away, but it became a brilliant moment. And the fact that they were kissing each other's ass so much was so funny in interview bites of what people are thinking.
Yeah.
That it actually made for a really entertaining scene. And if Chris had done what I wanted him to do, which was to stop them and get them real, it would have been too straight ahead and too not that interesting.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of stuff where you're not scripting this stuff. You just let it play out. And it's really fascinating to watch it happen. And to figure out what to do with it.
How do you, maybe you can describe your job a little bit about like just how you interact with the network and stuff too, because that's a big part of your job as well, right?
Yeah.
What's the process of, when the reality show's being edited and it's like sending the cuts to the network and dealing with notes and everything?
Yep. One of the, it was interesting, Bravo, as you know, is a difficult network to deal with because I love working with them because they are so demanding about how they tell their story.
Right.
So I come from story. I love story. It's all I care about. And they want you to tell the most interesting stories. And they've seen between all their franchises, it gets really hard. They're like, okay, we've seen 7,000 shopping scenes. Mm-hmm. Why am I watching this one? Mm-hmm. So you can't just make it about shopping. And so each year gets harder and harder, but I like that from them. They're not lazy. They push you. Our first episode on Beverly Hills this season is a huge challenge because Lisa Vanderpump isn't on the show.
Right.
And there's going to be a lot of eyes on it. And again, can't go into too many details, but we were pushed like crazy to make it entertaining. And I'm really proud of the team of people. I cannot take credit for it at all that did this. Really, really, really entertaining episode, I think. I'm really excited for it to air. So the way I work with the network is just you're in constant communication with them about from day one of where are we with each of these cast members, what's going on with their life, what are you shooting, what is taking place, what stories are developing. Part of my job, as you know, when you're in field, you have to, it's like a giant, boulder going down the hill, and you're just reacting to this momentum that is production.
Yeah. It's
the drama that's taking place. But when you get to post 3 months later and go, well, wait a second, this huge fight took place, but there was no, like, how did it get there?
Right.
You're like, we're missing setup to it. So now in a bad world, you're going back 3 months later and shooting scenes, which Bravo doesn't want you to do. And you don't do that. So that's, but what it forces you to do from my standpoint and from post standpoint is to be monitoring what's going on and thinking, okay, how is this going to play out in an episode? And do I have the right setup? So I'll go to a lot of the big events, and that's the benefit of Beverly Hills. Because I live here, I can go to all the big events. So I'm sitting there like at Kyle's party and I'm watching everything take place. So I know what happened that night. So the next day I can go, okay, here were the dramas that took place. Here were the issues that took place. Here are the things that were resolved. Here are the things that could be something. What would the next pieces in a story be? Well, these two should get together and they were talking about this, so we should have them get together in some way, whether it's shopping or dinner or bike riding. And you're trying to make sure that you have all the pieces you need to tell the story in post down the road. And you're constantly talking to Bravo. What happened at the party last night? Oh, Kyle did this and Rena did this and Teddy did this and blah, blah, blah. And okay, so how are you going to, like, if Teddy did this, like, how are you going to make sense of that? Well, she should get together with Erica and talk about it. Okay. And again, we don't script them to say but they should get together and talk about it. What they do is up to them.
Right.
But at least I have the story beats that I need to tell the story.
Yeah.
So during production, I'm in constant communication with Bravo as Chris is the field producer or the field showrunner. And we're constantly talking about what pieces do we have? Do we have everything we need? And are we following all the right stories?
Right.
Then when it gets to post, we start putting the shows together. And that's when, Bravo starts to watch the cuts and say, this doesn't make sense. We don't like this. This is boring, or this is great. Keep going this way, whatever. So I'm with, constantly talking to Bravo all the time. Whether it's through notes and cuts or conversations, it's a real collaboration in the perfect world.
Yeah. How do you deal with the notes Bravo has notorious for giving like lots of notes.
Yes.
But I do really agree with you. Like, I think that the people that work there are incredibly intelligent. They have a real keen sense of story, and they're only pushing to make it better.
Right.
And I've definitely worked on shows on other networks where the network executives were like just idiots. And like their notes made no sense.
Please name them. No.
I won't name them. Or they just, they got in the way of the story, and I don't feel Bravo does that. I do think they do make it better. But it's a hard process. How do you deal with the copious amounts of notes that you may get? And it's just like, and sometimes it's like, okay, start over, because this is not the way that it's going to be. Just like tear it all down and build it up again. It can be discouraging. It
can be. There is such a lesson in dealing with notes that it happens in every field. When I was going to film school, I had a writing class that was taught by a producer, and she had done Sleepless in Seattle. Her name was Linda Obst, and
I think I might have interned at her office.
Really?
No, I'm sorry. I interned for Laura Ziskin.
Okay, yeah.
Just like Pretty Woman and the Spider-Man reboots, but yeah.
But she did a lot of big films, and what was great about the class, there's only like 8 of us in the class. And we would write a screenplay with her. And she was a Hollywood producer. That's cool. She was she did Fisher King and, lots of old films that nobody knows about anymore. But
I love Fisher King.
Yeah, I do too, actually. And she brought in amazing writers to meet with us and read our pages. So Nora Ephron and her husband, Nick Pelagia, who wrote Goodfellas, came in. And we would sit there in her house and drink a bottle of wine, and they would read our pages and talk about screenwriting. I mean, it was great.
That's awesome.
That alone was worth the price of going to USC. One of the guys that came in was named Pat Conroy, and he wrote Prince of Tides. He wrote The Great Santini. He was a novelist, and he told this story. He's like, to be a writer, you have to almost be psychotic. You have to have two personalities. You have to be open to all the creative ideas out there. So your skin has to be super thin, and you have to be super sensitive, and you have to just be open to the world. And you create this stuff, and then you turn it in, and then you get network notes, or in this case, studio notes. He goes, and then you have to have super thick skin, because if you approach it with this thin skin of your creativity mind, you will get obliterated, and you will be a puddle of self-doubt and tears. and it's really hard to balance the two, because once you get eviscerated with notes, which everybody does, then you got to go back and you got to be super open again, and you got to be super creative. Because if you don't, and you're guarded and you're worried about what they're going to do and what they're going to say, or you're just trying to please them, you're going to produce crap.
Yeah.
And little did I know that was the best advice I've ever gotten about notes ever. And I had no idea at that time that I would be, so much of my job would be dependent on creatively dealing with notes. And so I always keep that in mind. And I always tell everybody I work with, it's tough when you get, there was a season of Orange County that was just a brutal season of Orange County. And every set of notes that came back was just like another, punch in the gut. And the shows weren't bad, but it's just, sometimes they're just, the cycle of network, attitude toward the show. Sure. and the material that you have, and you're making, if they knew, you can do the poor me thing, and you can say, if you only knew the material I had and how bad it was and what we turned it into, you don't appreciate, they don't care. The show airs and it competes to get everything in that time zone, and nobody watches that show and goes, oh, well, that was a pretty good show considering the constraints they had,
Yeah.
And so it just has to compete in the open market. So there's no excuses. And so, but there was a season of Orange County where I remember we opened up with this party, and the note was, I really want to like this party, but I don't. And then it went and listed all the bad things about the show. And that season, the notes were so bad that I started this thing that we did for a couple seasons, which was, I had a lot of people, we were all into gambling, and we would start to bet on how many pages of notes it was going to be.
Oh, I remember seeing you guys doing this at the office.
And we would put in $1 in this big bucket, and you would guess how many pages. And then we got crazy. And then we were like, how many times do they use the word wonky? We had set an over and under. Or is the first sentence of the notes positive? Like, hey, great episode, or great start. Is it negative? Like, I'm really worried about this episode.
Yeah.
Is it positive negative? Like, I want to like this episode, but I don't. Or is it negative positive? So we end up developing all these things. By the end of the season, whoever won that day got a point. And at the end of the season, whoever had the most points won the pot. And you had to do something for the staff, but you got to keep the rest of the money. Well, the pot ended up being over $1,000.
Oh my God.
We're betting $1,
Yeah.
And everybody was so into it. And it was just a way for us to have fun with shitty notes.
Just enjoy the punishment. That's genius.
And the person who won brought in a margarita machine on a Friday, and we drank and got drunk on a Friday afternoon, and they had another like $600 or $700 to pocket.
That's awesome.
But that's one way you deal with the notes. But the other way is just, it is that dual mind. If you take everything they say verbatim and just try to please them, you will produce crap, because they don't know what you have, and they want it to be certain things. And you've heard this a million times. You've done this long enough to know. It's the spirit of the note.
The spirit of the note. Yeah.
If they say you need to do this and do this and do that, and then you do it and you go, okay, that's crap. That doesn't work at all. You're like, okay, what's the purpose? Like, why did they give that note? You know why they gave the note? Because they were confused. And now they're trying to explain it. And that's how they think we should explain it. But they don't know what we have and don't have, and they don't know where it goes. So let's solve the problem of clarifying this.
Right.
And so let's do it this way. And what's great about Bravo is, most of the time, it's not always, but you do that and they send it and it works. And they understand that. They're not looking for you to, just check off their notes.
Right.
And there are times when specifically certain people give notes and you got to do those kind of notes. And I don't think they're good, but that's the other thing that you learn is that this is a collaborative job.
Yeah.
And that you can't attach your ego to it and go, this is what I want, or this is what I think is funny. The second you do that, you're just not going to survive. That it's going to get too hard to be in this business that way. You know better than anybody. You rely on everyone to make this show.
Yeah,
And
I mean, it's such a team effort. You can't do it by yourself.
no, and so everybody needs to be creative. Everybody needs to be open. Everybody needs to do it. The network is a good, guiding principle because they also, it's the business side of me. It's the having worked for Arbitron and understanding the way businesses work. They have a brand. They have other shows that I don't know about.
Right.
I say they don't know where this scene goes. They don't know what else we have in material. But on the flip side, I don't know what else they have in terms of other shows, and they've watched other scenes.
Or what their research is telling them.
Exactly.
If their demographic is saying that they want to see and like this and that. Yeah.
Yeah. So you got to just kind of let it go and be open to the process and try to make the best show. And in the process of doing that, again, you can't be a yes person and just do their notes because sometimes they don't work. And they don't want you to do that. They want to be entertained or surprised.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're just a slave to trying to please people through the notes because you're sick of getting them, your career is not going to go that long.
Mm-hmm.
You become, I think your reputation of whatever you have in this business is developed by how you find ways to let your creativity come out in the constraints that exist in this business. And in my case, it's Bravo's notes. And Bravo's notes can kill people sometimes. People have quit shows because of these notes.
Yeah.
People have left the business because of these notes. And I try to take pride at times, of how I deal with them and ways in which I try to solve them. I see them as challenges and challenge my staff to see it the same way. There was a guy I worked with in Orange County for years who would get really frustrated when the notes came in and it's really easy to vent and to bitch, but it becomes at some point, like I do the same thing. They come in and you're just like, ugh, and you respond to them emotionally. But after that initial response, you got to move on. And I would tell him, I said, listen, this is super hard and it'd be nice to just get simple notes, but Bravo doesn't trust a lot of people, and it's hard to get jobs on a Bravo show. If you ever try to get on until you've gotten on one and proven yourself, it's hard to get in here. And I've sent my kid to college because Bravo's so difficult to work with, because if they were easy to work with, everyone could get a job on a Bravo show.
Or one way, because I worked in post for years, like 6 or 7 years, doing story producing jobs and stuff, and I started looking at it like the more notes, the longer I'm working. Like that's like why that's like why I'm here. Like I'm if it were just this easy thing where you put your first version together and then shipped it off and it aired on TV, you'd have a job for a month or 6 weeks or whatever it is. But the fact that there's rounds of notes and you're constantly tweaking and trying to make it better and like make those little moments sparkle. It's like that now you're working for 3, 4, 5, 6 months, so it's like, yeah, sir, send me more notes. I'll keep working on it.
Cash that paycheck.
I want to start wrapping it up. We've been going for over an hour. What would you recommend to someone that is interested in working in post in reality, getting into, I think that story producing is one of the best jobs in reality. You start as a story editor, story AP, or, post PA, whatever it is. But working in post, there's just so many jobs.
Yep.
they run for long periods of time versus most field jobs, which are much shorter.
Right.
And and the pay is good. You can earn a good living doing story producing and then moving up the ranks from there.
Yeah.
What would you recommend to someone that wants to get into reality post?
I think, to me, the core thing is just understanding story, loving to tell a story. If you understand the elements of storytelling, you're going to be a strong story producer. On the what was it? The first season of Beverly Hills, a guy named Dave Rupel was the showrunner.
Yeah.
He was from soap operas, and a friend of his, soap operas were that business kind of was going down. The jobs were not, as plentiful because reality TV was taking over.
Mm-hmm.
And Dave had a friend who had written for years on soap operas. And he said, could you bring him in as a story editor? He doesn't know Avid. He's never done reality TV before. And, but he knows story. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, Dave wants him in here. We'll bring him in here. And I worked with him, and you can learn Avid. You know that,
right?
You can learn the mechanics of everything. It's really hard to be a good storyteller. And he was a good storyteller, and he picked it up right away because he knows the elements of what make a good story. And so when you watch material, to be able to look at this material and go, ooh, that's interesting, and that's good, and that's, that could be useful. So whether you love movies or TV shows or graphic novels or whatever you're into, understanding and having a strong story sense, knowing all the tools that are out there for screenplays are in reality TV. You have to have, backstory. You have to plant. You have to pay off. You have to have twists. You have to have all these elements that you learn in Sid Fields or Robert McKee or whatever kind of story structure classes you take here in Hollywood. You need to understand how all the elements of story work together to tell an entertaining story. Then you can apply them to the material you're watching and going, oh, you know what? That can be how we set it up. And, ooh, she was confused. That could be the twist, And so I still apply storytelling elements. It's interesting. They had BravoCon, and I spoke at BravoCon. You were there.
Yeah.
A
lot of fun.
A few months ago. And one of the things, they were like, oh, we want you to talk about how you, the story department, all this kind of stuff. And I was expecting to talk like we are now about how to tell stories. And they were like, well, we don't want you to talk about, don't call them scenes. and don't use screenwriting terms. And I'm like, do you know how I talk? And so I was constantly, and I get it. They didn't want to make it seem like we were scripting things because we don't.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that I don't use majority of all the storytelling techniques to tell an interesting story. So if you want to get in this part of the business, if you have a strong story sense, you're a leg up, and you will, you say like, there's a lot of work in it. Man, when I find people who get story, I hold on to them. I've worked with people forever. I keep them on my staffs, until they, finally get so sick of me, they have to leave and get promoted.
Yeah.
But, I can tell they watch material and they come back with ideas. I can tell, oh, they get how to tell. They see that that's entertaining. That's good. Or because the simplest things in telling a story, like on these Bravo shows, are like big fights. Those are the bright primary colors. Those are easy to see.
Yeah.
You get mad, you yell, you storm off, you do this. Anyone can put those together. Do a shopping scene. Do a restaurant scene. Do a scene with your kids and have some kind of point of view that's interesting.
A photo shoot with one housewife.
I hate photo shoots.
I always
shoots.
say, if I never have to shoot a photo shoot or a packing scene ever again for the rest of my life, I'll be happy.
So that's the biggest thing is if you love to tell story, there is a career for you in this, because when you show that talent, people will always want to hire you.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right, last question. What's your favorite housewife moment? Favorite scene, that's happened between the shows that you've worked on, Orange County or Beverly Hills, that stands out to you?
There's a million. There are so many of them because I do love doing these shows. They're so unpredictable. You're like, people go, "Do you script it?" It's like, are you kidding me? I could never think of this stuff.
The truth's always more interesting.
The most iconic one that it's not just a moment, it's an entire season, but that was the most interesting, fascinating, unbelievable moment for me was season 10 of Orange County Housewives with when Brooks faked that he had cancer.
That's the season I worked on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was unbelievable because no one would ever think that someone would do that on TV.
Yeah.
And when it first came out, this idea that he was possibly doing it, you didn't want to believe it.
Yeah.
And it happened to be, talk about like the stars coming together and just the coincidence of like bad luck for him was Megan Edmonds, because she was in town, having married Jim, and Jim's wife had cancer. Right. And was going to City of Hope, and she was helping her. And Brooks was telling stories to her about what he was doing. And she kept saying, "This doesn't make sense. This can't be right." And I don't think if she was not on the show, I don't think anyone would have followed it up enough.
I'm trying to remember. Didn't she like go to City of Hope and ask someone, or like look for his like record or something?
She would make phone calls. She went online
to prove that like, no, there's no record that this guy's ever been to this hospital.
Well, he finally produced a letter from City of Hope to her,
but it was like doctored.
And then she went online and found out that was letterhead from years ago.
Right.
That he got off the internet.
God, what a psycho.
We went and saw, my wife and I saw Andy Cohen and Anderson Cooper. They did their show together in New York. And they were and at one point Anderson Cooper said, every time I'm with Andy, he just lives in this different pop culture world that I'm not part of. And I'll be walking down the street with him and people will be going like, "Hey, Andy, pat the puss, pat the puss." And he's like, "I have no idea what they're talking about." He goes, one day he calls me up and Andy says to Anderson, "Go online and type in the word does in Google." So he types in the word does. And the first hit that comes up is, "Does Brooks Ayers have cancer?"
Oh my God.
And I remember that day.
Wow.
And that was number one for like a week and a half.
Wow.
And they were on stage talking about it. I'm sitting there going like, yeah, it was my season. And that was the season that, remember the podcast Serial?
Yeah.
That took off. And that was a big mystery. Did Adnan really murder his girlfriend?
Yeah.
And there's so many variations to it. Over break in Orange County, we had the Christmas break. I was in Michigan, where I was from, and I was visiting my family. Then my wife and I took the train to Chicago, and I binged Serial, and I became obsessed with it. And I'm like, I am in my own Serial because I'm getting emails from Tamara and from Shannon and from Megan, and they're saying, Brooks told us on March 15th that he did this, but then he told Shannon this on March 7th. I mean, they were. Yeah. And so I don't know if you were just in the field or you're in the office at all, but I had a giant board just dedicated to every single cast member, and every single week there was a timeline of a huge board, and I wrote down every single thing that took place. And I'm trying. It's like an FBI, mobster
with the
board.
red string connecting the documents on the corkboard and everything.
I became obsessed with it, and the challenge of the season was, how do you continually escalate this? Because they kept talking about the same thing. How do you add new layers to it so that we're not just hearing about, does he have cancer? Does he not? Does he not? Does he not? And the key element to the season was getting him to tell his side of the story. And that was the big thing was, again, in reality TV, you can't take sides. You can't have an opinion as the producer and go, well, I think, Tamara's right and Vicky's wrong, so I'm going to cut it to make it look that way.
Right.
I mean, you got to present it fairly, and you got to give each person a voice, because then you let the audience decide, and that's what becomes entertaining.
Yeah.
So we kept telling him and convincing him, you need to tell your story because they're telling a certain story. And so he did. And that made it really fascinating. And really, when the season ended, people had their opinions, but no one ever knew 100% for sure whether or not. But then once the season aired and it became such a big talking point, City of Hope, I mean, this is unheard of. City of Hope had to make an announcement, or decided to make an announcement saying, we have never treated a man named Brooks Ayers at our facility. And I think that was the final nail in the coffin where people went, yeah, he was lying.
My God. It's actually a really interesting example of, just looking at something through the lens of the field or lens of post, because I was shooting those scenes. I was there every day with those women, and me and Bill Langworthy, he ran the field that season too. We were like, God, is this all we're going to talk about?
Right.
Because it didn't feel like anything was changing. And just like every scene was them just speculating on like what he said or didn't say or who he said it to. And this, and it's like, it didn't, after several weeks of that, it's like, doesn't feel like this is going anywhere. Like maybe we should just move on. And we would ask the women like, what else can we, what else is going on? And they were like, no, this is, and then you got it in post and made it,
Well, I remember having conversations with Bill and he's like, man, they're just, and I said, and I was the same way. When you're in the moment, again, like I'm at that Kyle party going, have them stop telling, kissing each other's ass.
Yeah.
It's like when you're in the moment, you don't know what you have. It's not that clear. And it's only afterwards when you tell the story that it now becomes clear. And it's, that's what's fun about the job. And it is, I'm sure you're the same way. It's like, we love telling stories. And to me, they always say like, what's the meaning of life? That's the meaning of life is the meaning you give it at the end when you look back at everything you've done. Because when you're in your life, you are just living your life. And you add meaning and purpose at the end where you go, oh, this is the story of my life. You don't know it while you're living it. It's impossible. And it's the same thing. That's what's great about reality TV. It just mimics life in storytelling. It's all the same stuff. So
I think that's a great place to end it. It's a great tag. So Bill, thank you for coming over. Thank you for doing this. Loved it. And now let's just do some more magic tricks now.
Thanks a lot. I had a great time.
I appreciate it. All right, that was my chat with Bill Fritz. What a good dude. Thank you guys so much for listening. I really do appreciate it. I hope you are enjoying the episodes. If you haven't already, please go on to Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, wherever you're listening, and subscribe, leave a rating, write a review, anything you can do to help the show out. It will help get it into the ears of other people that may enjoy it. If you want to find me on Instagram, you can at Producer Jerry. That's at Producer Jerry. Or you can email me at show@workingclasshollywood.com. Stay tuned. I got some more great interviews coming up for you, and I will see you guys next time.